I opened my first Tier 1 vendor account last week, and I want to walk you through exactly what happened because it did not go the way the internet says it goes. If you have read any business credit guide, the process sounds simple. Apply to a Net 30 vendor, get approved, make a purchase, pay it early, and you have got your first reporting trade line. 4 steps. Everybody says the same thing. What actually happened involved a phone call I was not expecting and a piece of information that changes the timeline by about 6 months. So let me take you through it step by step, and then I will tell you what it means for how you should plan your own first round. First, the setup. Before I applied to anybody, my foundation was complete. And I want to be specific about what that means, because this is where most people go wrong and never find out. The entity was filed and in good standing. I had the EIN and the name on it matched the entity filing exactly. Business bank account in the legal business name, not a personal account, not a name I made up. A real business phone number, not my cell. A deliverable business address that is not residential and is not a mailbox store. DUNS. Number registered with Dun & Bradstreet. Registered with Experian Business and Equifax Business. That is the 8-point foundation, and every single item has to be done and consistent before you apply to a single vendor. Not most of them. All of them. I say this every time, and I am going to keep saying it, because the number one cause of first-time denials is not bad credit. It is a mismatch. Your business name on your bank account slightly different from your articles of organization. Your address formatted one way on your entity filing and another way on your D&B file. These are not typos to you. To an automated verification system, they are 2 different businesses, and neither one has a complete record. So, foundation, done. Next step, I picked the vendor. I went with Uline, and I want to explain why, because the reason matters more than the name. Uline sells shipping supplies, packaging, safety equipment, warehouse gear. Real products that a real business actually buys. That was the deciding factor. Not that it appears on every starter vendor list on the internet, though it does. The point of a Tier 1 account is to generate genuine activity that produces a reporting trade line. If you pick a vendor whose products you will never use, you end up buying things you do not need just to manufacture credit activity, and that is a waste of money dressed up as a strategy. I applied, approval came through. And this is the moment where if you follow the standard guides, you think you are done with the hard part. You are approved, you have got net 30 terms, now you just buy something and pay it early. I made a purchase, $86, genuinely useful for the business, and I picked that amount deliberately. Not the cheapest possible item, because a trade line with a tiny high credit amount demonstrates almost nothing to anyone reading your file later. But not a huge order either, because this is a first purchase with a vendor I have no history with, something real and proportionate. And then I got a message from Uline that changed my understanding of this entire step. Before I tell you what it was, I want you to notice something about the sequence so far. Nothing I did was clever, there was no trick, no insider angle, no special application method. I completed a foundation, I picked a vendor whose products I would genuinely use, and I made a normal purchase. That is the entire strategy, and it is deliberately unexciting. Anyone selling you something more complicated than this at the Tier 1 stage is selling you complexity, not results. Here is what they told me. Because the account was new, that first order had to be paid in full up front, prepaid, even though I had selected Invoice Me at checkout and even though the account was approved. Now, that on its own is not unusual. Plenty of vendors want a new account to prepay the first order. It is a low-risk way for them to confirm you are a real business that actually pays. So I asked the obvious follow-up question, and I would encourage you to ask this every single time. How many orders, or what dollar volume, before this converts to actual net 30 terms? The answer was 6 months. And the dollar amount does not matter. Let me say that again, because it is the part that changes your planning. It is not one order. It is not $500 in volume. It is time. Roughly 6 months of account history before they will extend net terms, regardless of how much you spend. So here is what that actually means for your credit file. And this is the part nobody tells you. A prepaid order is not credit. You paid money, you received goods, transaction complete. There is no extension of credit, which means there is nothing for the vendor to report to a credit bureau. No terms, no payment window, no trade line. Which means that first purchase I made, useful as it was for the business, did not start a clock on anything credit related. I want to be careful and honest here. I have not verified independently what Uline does or does not report once an account is on actual net 30 terms, and I am not going to state something as fact that I have not confirmed. What I can tell you is what the representative told me about the timeline, and what is logically true about prepaid transactions, which is that a prepayment does not create a trade line because no credit was extended. Now, why does this matter so much? Because of how people plan. The standard advice says open 3 to 5 Tier 1 vendor accounts, pay them early, and after a few months of seasoning, you can step up to Tier 2. That advice is correct, but it silently assumes every account you open starts reporting more or less immediately. If 2 of your 5 vendors require 6 months before extending terms, your actual timeline is not a few months. It is 6 months before those accounts even begin, and then the seasoning period on top of that. That is the difference between thinking you are 8 months from Tier 2 and actually being 14 months away. And you would not know it because everything looks fine. You applied, you were approved, you made purchases, you paid. From the outside, it looks like progress. Meanwhile, 2 of your 5 accounts have not produced a single reporting cycle. This is the same failure mode as the vendor that does not report at all, just slower and harder to spot. In both cases, you are doing everything right and building nothing, and you find out much later than you should. So what do you do with this? 3 things, and they are all just questions you ask before you commit. First, ask whether the first order must be prepaid. Second, ask what specifically converts the account to net terms, and get an actual answer, whether it is a number of orders, a dollar threshold, or a length of time. Third, ask whether they report to the business credit bureaus and which ones. 3 questions, 2 minutes on the phone. And they tell you whether the account you are about to open will produce a trade line in 30 days or in 7 months. And write the answers down. Not in your head, in a document, next to the vendor name, with the date you asked and who you spoke to. Because 6 months from now, when you are trying to work out why an account has not appeared on your file, that note is the difference between knowing and guessing. So, let me tell you what I am actually doing about it and what I would do if I were starting over knowing this. First, I am keeping the Uline account. I am not walking away from it. The products are genuinely useful, the relationship starts aging from today, and 6 months from now it converts to net terms and becomes a real trade line. That is a fine outcome. What I am not doing is counting it as one of my starting Tier 1 accounts because right now it is a supplier relationship, not a credit account. Those are different things, and I want to be honest with myself about which one I have. Second, I am opening additional Tier 1 accounts with vendors that extend terms up front, because my clock needs to start now, not in 6 months. The whole point of Tier 1 is generating reporting trade lines that age. An account that will not report for half a year is not doing that job yet. Third, and this is the habit I would push hardest, I am documenting all of it. For every vendor, the date I applied, the date I was approved, whether prepayment was required, what I was told converts the account to net terms, which bureaus they say they report to, the date and amount of each purchase, the date I paid, and then later, the date the trade line actually appeared on my file and which bureau it appeared on. That record does 2 things. It tells you what is actually working instead of what you assume is working, and it becomes the most valuable business credit document you own. Because 6 months from now, when you are trying to figure out why one account shows up and another does not, you will have the answer instead of a guess. Now let me zoom out, because there is a bigger point in here. The reason I am telling you about this is not that Uline did anything wrong. They were upfront, the representative answered my question directly, and requiring prepayment from a brand new account is a completely reasonable business decision on their end. The reason I am telling you is that this is what the process actually looks like, and almost nobody shows you that. The guides give you a clean 4-step sequence. Apply, approve, purchase, pay. Real vendor relationships have conditions, waiting periods, and requirements that only surface when you are in them. And the gap between the clean version and the real version is where people lose 6 months without realizing it. If you take one thing from this video, take this. Before you open any vendor account, ask the 3 questions. Does the first order have to be prepaid? What converts this to net terms? Do you report, and to which bureaus? You will get straight answers, and you will know what you are actually getting, instead of what you assumed. And plan for the real timeline, not the advertised one. Building business credit properly is slower than the internet suggests, and that is fine, because the businesses that get funded are not the ones that moved fastest. They are the ones whose file tells a consistent story from top to bottom. I am going to keep documenting this build as it goes, including the parts that do not work, because I would rather show you the real version than a version I made up. If you want the foundation checklist I mentioned at the start, the 8 items that have to be complete and consistent before you apply to a single vendor, grab the 8-point business fundability checklist. It is free, and the link is in the description. And if you have not seen it, my video on why business credit applications get denied covers what happens when that foundation is not right. Watch that one next.